All right, so let me get started. Welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. This is part of our series on conversations. Today we are exploring one-on-one conversation. This is going to be on having a good one-on-one conversation. We're going to deal with 4 questions. First one is, what is a good one-on-one conversation? Again, so that's the first question. The second question is, how do you remain cognizant of the context of the other person during a conversation? Number 3, at its best, what does a one-on-one conversation do for you? And 4, what principles, tools, tips have you found useful in making your one-on-one conversations better? Okay, so the final one is going to be kind of takeaways, not takeaways from this meetup, but anything, any pearls of wisdom that you have learned that make your conversations better. But we're going to start off with, what is a good one-on-one conversation? So go ahead and type exclamation mark if you'd like to share. I hope everybody would like to share. So go ahead and type exclamation mark. We're going to start with Evanik, followed by Joe. Evanik, what's a good one-on-one conversation?
That is a very good question. And the answer I would say is one that, both parties are engaged and interested in whatever you're discussing. But to me, what makes a good one-on-one conversation is that the conversation just flows. And by that, I mean, like, it's just natural. There isn't, I want to say no uncomfortable pauses, but you have the ability to think about it. Like, you can say to the person, let me think about that for a minute. And then you can sit and think about it. And like I said, the topic has to be interesting, and it could be anything. Like, it could be something playful. It could be something serious. I think it's all about the person that you're talking to. Can you keep this conversation going? It doesn't feel forced. So I think it has to be casual. I think it has to be comfortable. I think you have to have knowledge of the person you're talking to. But yeah, I think there's for me, a great one-on-one conversation is something that has ease to it. It's just like a flow. So those are my thoughts.
Excellent. I love this. So what you're saying is that, both parties are engaged. So I think you're just saying one thing, and all of these are kind of aspects of it. So you are tailoring, you're making sure that the conversation is tailored for that person so that they are engaged, and it's also tailored for you. So it's like that intersection between you and the other person. You've taken care of it so well that number 1, both of you are engaged. Number 2, it kind of flows. There is no force, feeling of being forced. There is a level of comfort. Again, that's kind of knowledge of both parties. And there is a level of ease. So I think that kind of making sure that whatever you're doing with this person is consonant with their values and your values about that conversation. That conversation could be on anything. Maybe for the same person, you may not want to talk about something else. They may not be engaged in that, or you may not be engaged. But I hear you saying that. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, very good. Let's go next to Joe, David, and Brian. Joe, what's the conversation?
For me, I mean, this is actually one of the more interesting questions, because I like one-on-one conversations with somebody because you connect with them on a personal level.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I consider to be something is that person then trusts you with something, a good conversation was that person feels like they can share something with you. And it could be an impromptu, very like a random meeting, or it could be someone that you know very well, that they are opening up and revealing something about themselves that they wouldn't necessarily reveal to anyone else.
Mm-hmm.
And that they trust you in that process.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the examples that for me I remember talking to my friend's brother, and it was the first time I had ever met him, and he never opened up to anybody, and he opened up very much to me, and his brother said, I did that, he doesn't do that with any of our family members or anything like that. And I didn't do anything in particular. I really didn't. It was just, but it was something where there was this personal connection that we had. And so there's this trust that you have. So what do you do is that I think what you walk away, not only learning something about someone else, but you also learn something about yourself in the process. And I think that that's true of any conversation, but I think when it's a one-on-one conversation, you have more of an opportunity to take advantage of the moment where you can really go deeper than you would be if you were in front of other people. So I think that's another aspect of it. I think trust is probably one of those. It's foundational to every conversation, but I think it's more foundational in the sense that with a one-on-one group or in one-on-one individual, because then it opens up all kinds of possibilities where you learn all kinds of things, and then you start to understand the perspective that somebody has and why they have it. And anyway, that's all.
Wonderful. So I hear you saying a few things here. First, you're saying that a one-on-one conversation offers you an opportunity that you don't have in other conversations because you are one-on-one with this person. So you can go much more deeper. Specifically, the thing I liked about what you said is that is the point of trust and connection. And you looked at it from two aspects. One is that you are, like Evanik, Evanik was saying, these are the requirements, but you are adding one more point to it, that a good conversation takes something forward. Like you are increasing the trust. You're starting with the trust. That's a requirement. You're starting with a personal connection. That's a requirement. But a good conversation takes that trust, takes that connection, and makes it deeper. So you actually know the person better. So all your future interaction with them is going to be better as a result of that conversation. And that is about them and the connection. But in addition to that, the other point that you made was that you learn something about yourself. And this is absolutely true when there is this depth of connection. You can, only if the connection is deep enough, you have the possibility of learning something about yourself. If it's a very superficial conversation about specific things that you are doing or a transaction, then the chance that you will learn something fundamental about yourself is not that high. Go ahead, Joe. You would like to add anything?
I was just, agreeing with you 100%, is that it's an opportunity to learn something about yourself that you wouldn't be able to do if it were in front of multiple people. That's the value of one-on-one. And where you were saying otherwise it becomes transactional is actually, that's excellent in the sense that, yes, I mean, if it's something where you're just talking to somebody in passing about, directions or something, you're not necessarily going to learn about something yourself. But that was it. Thank you. Thank you for clarifying.
Next up is going to be David, Brian, and Mike. David.
Yeah, I mean, lots of great comments from so far. I mean, I'd add, I think that it's important for two people to be attuned to one another, to actually be, that it not be two soliloquies. In other words, need to be actually, I may say even with an audience as well, I mean, or with individually, that you actually pay attention to the response of the person and understanding, are they and recognizing, are they understanding, are they not understanding, adjusting the conversation to match that. I think it's also important to be that you want to speak truthfully, honestly with the person if it's a good conversation, and have something, I mean, not so much a manipulative point of view, but you have a point of view, something that you want to say, and that the other, and both people have something they want to say, that they want to communicate, a statement to help each other understand. Again, this is sort of a tuning they want to help bring their mutual understanding forward. And also that they, related to that, or sort of a more detail, that they want to hear each other. They're actually listening, they're actually paying attention to hear each other. And that sort of related to what Jordan Peterson has said, that you come to the conversation with the assumption that you could learn something from the other person.
Wonderful. So I'm going to highlight a few points here. You stress the point about listening. You come to it saying that this person has something that I can learn, and then you're actually genuinely listening to them. That's crucial for your own growth, what you can get from the conversation. If you go into the conversation, you just say your piece and you're gone, then firstly, you do not know that you have actually communicated anything, because only even to kind of make sure that you've communicated, you need to listen enough. And secondly, if you're just there to speak something, then you are missing out on this entire potential of what they could offer you. You're not even giving them a chance to do that. The other point that was there implicitly, that you're coming at it from a point of view, you're trying to increase the mutual understanding. I do think that having a purpose is important, where, for me, what I try to do is that I always think of saying, what's the best thing that we can do together? What will take them forward, me forward, whatever we are doing together forward. So I put some thought into that, because then what it does is that you're not just reacting to whatever is taking place. Even the reaction will get you somewhere, because you have this commonality of values, but I think the addition of purpose, I think, adds to that. Would you like to comment anything more on? Okay, thank you. Next up is going to be Brian, followed by Mike. Brian.
Okay. I think there are many different scenarios with a one-to-one conversation. The things I'm thinking of, like it can be, for example, it can be a performance review with someone. It can be simply a vehicle for getting information from someone or passing information. And then again, it can be just a chance meeting. Like, for example, you've both been assigned the same seat row in an aircraft for a flight. There's all sorts of situations where it can arise. And this changes what I think makes a good conversation. Generally, for social purposes, I think it's something that you've got to identify that you're both interested in getting something out of the conversation and putting something into the conversation. For if you're trying to just get information, you both have to have similar objectives, where one gives the information, the other receives it. And to judge it, you've got to both, well, in all the conversations, consideration for your partner has got to be considered. And that's probably one of the most important things. It's the only other thing I would add, again, for me, this is a very personal comment, a one-to-one conversation is great. A one to more than one is terrible. Okay.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Brian. I just want to say that I also like many-to-many conversations. I have found them quite useful in this 52 living ideas. So I'm just kidding a little bit, but no, one-on-one conversations, you can actually get a lot more done in a as compared to a many-to-many conversation. There are 2 points that you made. one, you built on the points that other people are making, that, you actually have to have, consideration for the other person. You actually have to respect the other person. You actually have to say, okay, you know what? They are a human being with their own life, with their own purposes, their own context. What is it? And so having that as a starting point is very good. And I really like the point that you made about scenarios, because the context of the conversation is different. Why you are having the conversation, what relationship you have with the person, what commonalities that you have, the extent of how long you've known them, how well you know them. All of those are the background for selecting, how do you proceed with the conversation. So that's an excellent point. Brian, would you like to add anything else?
No, I think I covered it.
Wonderful, thank you. Next up, this is the most difficult conversation I always have, is with Mike. Mike, go ahead. Mike, what is a good one-on-one conversation?
Well, you described a whole list of considerations, which goes back to something that I've always said, that most things are not scalars of 1-0 evaluation. They're not even tensors, or they're not even matrices or vectors. They are dependent on a whole list of things that you ought to be able to quantify. And I'll add a few of those to the list that you have. I didn't get to copy down the list, but we should try to build the decision space with the list that you had. And maybe I'll get that out of
Let me ask you a question, Mike. How well are you able to use this decision tree in real time in actual conversations? How do you do that?
All the time. And let me see, and it's basically my knowledge of tensor algebra, which was invented by Minkowski at the turn of the century, and enabled Einstein to do relativity, and enabled Feynman to come up with his Feynman diagram.
So, okay. Excellent. What we are going to do, Mike, is that we will take this as a tool in the final fourth question. So I'll have a whole bunch of questions for you. So if you could have something ready on saying, how do you actually use this multivariate functions in conversations? How do we do that?
Okay, let me add a couple things to right now.
Okay, sure. About what's a good conversation? What's a good one-on-one?
Well, let me answer it this way. You need to decide why you're having that conversation. Is it for persuasion purposes? Is it to gather information for the benefit of the person you're talking to, for the benefit of the group, or for your benefit? So the purpose, persuasion is one purpose. Information gathering is another purpose. Planning and coordination is another purpose. I think I at one time came up with 7 purposes for a conversation.
If you could reproduce that list in the fourth question, then we can start off with that. I think that's a very good list.
Okay, let me try. Maybe I can, maybe I can't. Let me add a few more items.
Sure.
David said the two people need to be attuned to each other. And that's important. But that's also one of the variables to the tensor definition of the decision space. I also need to add that language is an imperfect medium for communication. You recognize that in the fact that you usually come up with some variation of the so-called Kvyat diagram in terms of your multidimensional mathematical pictures that you draw, because you recognize that language, now a two-dimensional Kvyat diagram, though, is, I use those too, and I use it, and I have various formats of them. But it's a couple things that it's complicated sometimes.
Yeah, let's look at the tools all together. We'll have other people presenting the tools, and we'll put these tools side by side with the tools. But great point. Thank you.
I'll Dave that. Let me drive a couple more points through.
Sure.
You know what? Do you want me to? Let me drive one more point too. That sets the context for this. In 1973, Star Trek was born. And Dr. Spock, recognizing that language wasn't a good thing to talk about, he put 2 fingers on the forehead of the person he was talking to. And Captain Kirk, for example, or a patient he was trying to talk to, or even a non-living thing like a computer. And then
Mike, I will. That is also a tool. So if you have perfected the Vulcan mind grip, I look forward to learning about it.
Finish about the tool. The tool. He called it a mind meld. Mind meld.
Yes.
And it was well defined. Supposedly, that tool exists.
Let's work on that in the tool section. Let me go ahead and summarize it. So what Mike is saying is that you have to be aware of various purposes that you have, and to think of it in terms of kind of a matrix of saying, okay, these are the various things that I'm trying to achieve. The other point, which nobody has made so far, and I'm actually a very big fan of it, is using kind of visual things. If you're trying to communicate very complex things, being able to draw diagrams, I found to be very useful way of communicating very, very complex things. And I do use it during one-on-one conversations. Thank you, Mike. Next up is going to be Bob. Bob, what is a good one-on-one conversation?
Well, what is a good one is one that works. As was just mentioned, the languages that one speaks, it helps to have something. It helps to have a common language. If one person speaks French and the other English only, that isn't going to work too well. Your idea, Shrikant, about using visuals, which I can't use at the moment, is an excellent one. Sign language and so on. The topic of it helps to have the topic of interest. It helps to have a common topic of interest, and to do that, it also helps to name what the topic is. So to ask the question, what makes a good conversation is a very that kind of blows my mind. It is a very general question. It's an excellent question, but it is a general one. What makes it listening to the other person helps. I'm just overwhelmed a little bit by about the previous caller.
That's right.
The language he was using. I recognize some of the mathematical terms in there. Super, but you have to know a little bit of mathematics to speak to that, and so when you ask the question, what makes it interesting? Makes a good conversation? I always like to look at the limits. What is the limit on a good conversation? What makes it? How does it not fail to work? I'll stop there.
Wonderful. So I like 3 points that you made. One is about common language. Now, this may seem to be a very simple point, but it is not. Because it's the same as establishing common context, common values. What is it that you can take for granted, and where can you begin? Where can you communicate very well? I think common language. Then one point that you made very briefly, and some people have put up on it, is to put that down as well, is the issue of purpose. Saying that, okay, look, now we are doing this, and now we're doing that. So it's like both people are focused on the same goal. So being a little bit explicit about what you're doing during the conversation, and as you shift from one thing to another, is very good. I find questions to be a really powerful way of doing that. And limits is a very interesting idea. I mean, I do think that being aware of the limits, how much time do you have? Like, for example, if you think that the conversation is going to be a 3-hour conversation, the way you would do something is different from if it was a half an hour conversation. So the entire, like the arc is going to be different. Are you going to be sitting down or are you going to be walking? Are you going to be eating or not eating? All of those things are limits on the conversation. And those have to be taken into account in designing the conversation. So fantastic points, folks. Let's go to the next question. Now, this is a question, we've talked about it indirectly, that you have to be cognizant in order for a good conversation, a conversation to succeed, a one-on-one conversation to succeed. You have to be cognizant of the context of the other person. And that cognizant of the context is a very rich term. So context means values, where their background is, how they are, their entire past. Context also encompasses the context they have with you. Context also encompasses what the current situation is. Context also encompasses how things change during the conversation. They may get upset about something, and then the context has changed, or they will get excited about something, and the context has changed. So context is everything that is going on with the other person. So the question is, how do you remain cognizant of the context of the other person? So please, I would love to hear what thoughts you have about keeping the context of the other person in mind. Go ahead and type an exclamation mark to talk about this point. We'll start with Joe. Joe, go ahead.
There have been a lot of great points made thus far. I just wanted to make that statement as regarding purpose and all those things. How do you understand the context of the other person? I think that there's a lot of different ways to approach that. It was interesting that I think Bob said common language is important, but I think that one of the reasons it's important is that you listen to the types of words that people use, and then that kind of gives you context as to where they're coming from. Mm-hmm. That can give you context as to their background. An academic will very much show they're an academic often, not all the time, very, in a very, very quickly, or someone else from a different part of the country is also going to show maybe they have a certain dialect that they're coming from. So that gives you context as to where they're coming from. Some people from New Jersey might, they have their own, they have their own language. Yes. So, and if you're from New Jersey, that you'll have superiority complexes. No, I mean, I just that you have that context. No, though, but I'm just saying that. But basically, I think that one thing is the words that they use is actually very important in that process. So that means listening very closely to what they're saying. I also think that there is the way they approach certain topics as well. If they approach a topic with a lot of passion right off the bat, and this is someone that you've just met, and you're in a one-on-one conversation, and they're revealing how passionate they are about something, that gives you a lot of context as to that they're an individual that's really open and they're going to share. And so that allows you, that gives you, and this is kind of goes to Mike's point earlier, is that it's kind of you're gaining information in this process. And then from there, you can kind of, and again, I think this is Bob's point, but a point that's been made here in the past about conversation, you can start to draw boundaries around the conversation itself, because now you have an understanding of where they're coming from, how intensely, intensely they'll approach the process, and then you can draw boundaries. Now, I'm talking about this strictly in the context of someone that you may just be meeting, but this still holds true to, someone that you just have this information pre-populated. Part of the other thing is that you can also gauge if you know the person well and it's one-on-one, that you can gauge the emotional level, that the emotional state of the individual as well. So all of these things, all these nuances that come in, and then sometimes, there are people that are presenting themselves in a certain way and want to come off in a certain way. And I think that comes out, and that's sincerity. There's a certain level of sincerity that kind of comes out as well. And that reveals itself in different ways. So I think that these are all things that you can gather information to understand where the person's coming from, maybe literally in certain cases because of the dialect that they have, or where the person's coming from as far as their opinions are concerned, or their interest levels. If academics tend to show themselves pretty quickly. So there's a lot that goes into context, but actually gathering all that information, assembling that really quickly, allows you to immediately put down boundaries to then know how to engage with someone else. That's wonderful. And I'm sure there's more than that, but.
Excellent. Thank you. So I want to highlight two things. One, and this is I think, really, really big point. And the point that you're gathering information, but you're not just gathering information. You're using that information to actually rework your plan for the conversation. So you go into a conversation saying, okay, this is what I want to do. But the information that you're gathering about their context keeps changing the plan. You said change the boundaries of the conversation. So that feedback loop. And then you talked about the kinds of information, the words that they use, what is it that they react positively to or negatively to, the emotional state, etc. I just want to add one thing, and one thing that I find really difficult to incorporate, but it's very powerful. It's the principle of dog that did not bark. Many times, like you say, okay, what would I have expected and was not there, or right, something like that.
What didn't they say?
What didn't they say?
That is
So that's like the silence. You're trying to get that part too. Wonderful, thank you. Joe, go ahead.
Yeah, just really quickly. One thing that I think it's pretty interesting is that it's almost like playing poker in a way, and this idea that you should have been paid on a certain hand and you didn't get paid. That's an information. That's a tell. Right? That means something is, that something's wrong. If you expected to hear something and you didn't hear it, then you either you need to reassess or whatever it may be. And again, it's like a game. It's like game theory and orientation. So anyway.
One general point I want to make is that people are different. Like the way in which they process information is different. So whatever we are saying here, right? There are some people who will process the same thing. Let's say that there are two people who are processing exactly the same factors, the 5 factors. The way in which people do it is very different. And you kind of have to know yourself, and you have to know what you can do in real time. So for example, some people can grasp these things intuitively. They actually feel all of these things, many things happening, and they automatically take it into account, and they are just wordlessly changing what they are doing with that. There are people who prefer to actually say, okay, look, these are the 4 or 5 things I'm measuring. And currently it is on the scale of 8, on 1 to 4, it is at 3 here. I was expecting it to be 1, but why is it 4 here? So it's like you can do it in a mathematical way. And for some people, that's the way in which they operate. So if you're hearing somebody say something in an intuitive way, if you want to use it, you have to kind of convert it. If you use mathematics in processing these things, you have to convert it. If you're hearing somebody say mathematically, try to see what are they trying to do, and how would you do that? Do the same thing. So there are some equivalent ways. Not all methods are good for all things. Okay, there are some things that intuition is very, very good at. There are some things that measurement is very, very good at, and there is a lot of overlap between them. And some people can use both of them together in concert. Just want to make that point. So everything that people are saying, you have to realize their context and their method of doing things. So try to hear it, and then you have to remap it in your own language with your own skills and say, okay, how can I use this? Does this make sense to me? If so, how will I use it? And maybe the way in which you use it is going to be different than how the other person is doing that. Next up is going to be David, followed by Brian. David.
Yeah, thanks, Shrikant. I mean, I interpret this question in 2 ways. I mean, one is to understand the context initially for the conversation, which is, I mean, we may already know the person. Part of this, as we've talked about before with persuasion, is what sort of introduction has happened with the person. I mean, who's introducing you? What's the environment? Who are the other people that they may know? I mean, if it's not necessarily a cold call, but if you're talking to someone, let's say an important person, or to do a little bit of research or background or understand the person and their interests, to try to have some, understand what they may want from the conversation, understands that their background. So that's just what sort of to learn about them. But the other thing is that you were and Joe were talking about, which I think is complicated, is how to both stay in the flow of the conversation, in the moment, and also, be paying attention to them, be paying attention to what they're actually saying, and be able to respond. And as you said, not just a matter of have your sort of automated responses ready, but actually responding to them while also simultaneously being able to take some cycles out, shall we say, if you're like a computer, and think about, okay, what am I not hearing? Let's remember what was the purpose of this conversation. So it's a real balancing act to how to be present, but also to be taking some cycles to remind yourself and not look like you're drifting, but to be aware of, what's the context of this person? Is there something else that I want to cover in this? Is there something else that I can present this in a way that would be more palatable to the person, or more useful, or they'd be more receptive? So it's balance of how to be in the conversation, but also remembering the context of the person, the context of the conversation, and how to find the time for that without looking distracted.
Wonderful. Excellent point. So I'll highlight 2 things. One point is on preparation. I am a big fan of preparation for any kind of conversation, because your life is limited. The time you have with people is limited. Even if you spend a lot of time with people, still it is limited, and their context keeps changing, your context keeps changing. So you have to do the best you can in every interaction. And lot of the context, especially for people whom and which is like the bulk of the one-on-one conversations that are going to add to your value, is to your life, are going to be conversations with people that Now, doing the work of saying, okay, given their context, given my context, what is the best thing that can be done in the context of the conversation? I have 1 hour with this friend of mine. What should be done? What should I be aiming at? Which includes leaving space for them to put something on the table as well. That's part of it. But that planning, and there you are actually thinking, okay, who is this person? Where are they going? what is it that will actually help them? What is it that I'm capable of doing? All of those things, that kind of thinking at a very deep level. And the more preparation you do, the better the conversation is going to be. So there is the context point in preparation at a preparation level, and there is a context point in the dynamics of the conversation. So those are two different things. And I think it's crucial to focus on the preparation, not just on the dynamics. The second point you were making about being in the flow, being present at the same time, being able to review. I mean, this is a classic formulation of system 1 and system 2. So you have to have both your system 1 and system 2 going. And that's crucial. The proper operation of system 1 is going to create that flow. But it is the system 2 which is doing the preparation beforehand, which has set the context for it. And especially system 2 has to come in whenever there is a surprise. There is an upside or a downside. It doesn't matter which way. If there is any surprise, anything different from expectation, that's when the system 2 needs to jump in. And it doesn't need to micromanage. If you try to micromanage it, it's going to be very artificial, and it's not going to be able to connect to their system 1. So that dance between managing your system 1 and system 2 and interacting with their system 1 and system 2 while doing that, that's an excellent way of formulating it. Thank you. Next up is going to be Brian, Bob, and Evanique. Brian.
Okay, I noted about 4 bullet points in answer to this question. And I would, again, first of all, say it depends very much on the purpose, the type of the conversation. But considering professional meetings or professional conversations, my first bullet point is preparation and more preparation. If you're not prepared, then you are really going to flounder, and it is not a very good situation. The next bullet point is either if you know the person, that's good, or getting to know the person during the conversation is very important. Next one, staying focused in the conversation. It's something that requires practice, certainly for me. But if you lose focus, then you've lost the conversation. Social conversations actually can be harder in this respect. But I would say in that situation, for the social conversation, the key there is maintaining an interest and showing an interest. Okay, that's it.
Wonderful. Excellent points, Brian. I certainly think the preparation for a business conversation, that is everything. And I think it's important in personal conversation too. So I cannot, I'm a big fan of preparation, because that's when you have the chance of using all your capability to kind of set things up properly. And the issue of focus is very interesting. That's very important, because what happens is that it is very easy to get carried away and lose the bigger picture. I mean, in a business conversation, it's very, it happens, it tends to happen because you're trying to do something and they are trying to do something, and there is it's a complex set of things, and you can't lose the focus on the main thing that you're trying to do. And I like the formulation of interest as well. So very well put. Thank you, Brian. Next up is Bob, followed by Evanique. Bob.
Hi. If we're talking about conversations and context,
yes,
I see it's quite possible to have a great many kinds of context, and preparation is good. Depending on the topic, preparation is excellent. However, what if you are meeting somebody at a party and the object is just to have some kind of interaction, see if you're going to have a rapport. Maybe you want to start out with small talk. small talk is the opposite of, well, you can't very well prepare for that. Well, I'm not contradict myself. Maybe you can prepare for that, but the reaction will depend a great deal on about the person you're talking to. Now, more on context. If one is talking about a topic, is their purpose to give a speech, or are they interested in the other person and they want to listen? So listening is important if you want to get to know the other person, and if you want the other person to get to know you, maybe you want to give a speech. So those are two different motives. Somebody mentioned, I'll put it this way, there are different kinds of people. Some people want to talk about facts, and some people will pick out a particular fact and speak to it with a great deal of passion. So if you're talking to somebody, which is it that they want to do? Are they throwing facts at you, or do they want to push something? And that if you want to have a conversation with them, you better listen. It would help to distinguish between those two, and that means listening. Let's see if I have anything else to say. Well, this just floated through my head. Suppose you want to have a conversation with a child. Well, then it would certainly help to know something about children. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Bob. I want to follow up on several points that you made. One, you're saying, okay, how does this work with a new person, where the preparation is minimal? You can't do preparation; you've just met them. So that's one. The second point about the balance between speaking and listening, and the third one is the type of the person. Like, how are they processing information? So I want to address all 3 points. Let's start with the type of the person. I think and that's why I find Jung's ideas on kind of cognitive functions very useful. That's something that I really find it useful because what happens is that there is a tendency all of us have of just assuming that other person's mind works exactly like your mind works, and you just go on like a bull in the china shop using that method, and it works sometimes and it does not work sometimes, and you have no idea why. So understanding different ways in which people process things is a very useful thing. So having some kind of a framework for that, and I definitely recommend Jung's ideas on that. So that's one point. The second point about speaking and listening, and let us take at the context of a new person, because there it becomes more extreme. You don't even know the person. You don't even know who this person is. You met them at a party or in some random place. How do you manage the interaction between speaking and listening? Now that I don't see it as a, but I mean, I would love to have that. Let's put that as I'm going to separate that out. I would love to hear how everybody else thinks about this point. But it's a very interesting point. I personally do not see it as a contradiction. I always think of it in terms of common values, like common interests. So I'm trying to zero in on common interest. And if it is a common interest, if I speak something about a common interest, that's actually of interest to them. And then I'm inviting them to listen. So it's a question, generally when you're speaking too much, it's that you have not really identified the common interest, or you're not really cared to do that. That's the most common. I also think that just listening is not a good idea, because you're not telling people who you are. So you're not enabling them to identify, you're not establishing the common interest. So I think some kind of a judicious combination of speaking and listening is needed to establish common interest. You have to give them an opportunity of telling you what they value. and you have to tell them what you value. And you're trying to find that commonality between them, which is what is the base of conversation. But I would love to hear what other people have to say about this at some point. So the question is still, how do you pay attention to the context of the other person? Next up is going to be Evanique.
Yeah, this has been a very interesting conversation to listen to, because I think men and women, this is a case where we think a little differently. Because I'm thinking like, all these guys are talking about preparing for the conversation and, having, an idea of where the conversation is going. And it's all very masculine energy. It's all very structured, right? And women, and I'm sitting there thinking, we don't flow like that. Like, I mean, in a business conversation, yes, absolutely. You have a purpose. You go in there with a point, you're prepared for the conversation because But on a more personal level, I just don't think most women think this way. I think we go in kind of like just seeing where it goes, seeing if we like, I mean, and this is in male and female relationships, like seeing is there a chemistry there, seeing if there's a friendship there, seeing if there's a person I can bond with. And if like, I don't know, I think women, this is where intuitiveness comes in. Like we're more intuitive. So for us, it feels almost inauthentic to prepare for that conversation. Like if I call a friend of mine, I'm just like, hey, what's up? And that's it. Like that's the context of the conversation. And then we talk, and then when it's done, it's done. But the context, when I hear you guys when I hear all the men talk about the context, I'm like, huh. So you go in there, like, it feels like, as a woman, it feels like there's an agenda. And like women, we don't think like that. It's very interesting. Like, I get it on a certain level, but I'm like, wow, this is where the misinterpretation comes in all the time. Like the difference between men and women talking is like, huh. So guys, like, it's just interesting to hear men's headspace on this. And you guys all said basically the same thing. It's like, you guys go in there prepared. And yeah, this day, like you guys go in there prepared, ready to go. Like, where are we going with this conversation? And women will go all over the mulberry bush to get to her point. And now I can see how that could be frustrating to a guy. I kind of get it. I'm sorry. I'm not trying to make light of it, but I kind of get why there's a disconnect sometimes between women and men when we're talking to each other. Because it's like, you guys are on this track and we guys are like, we'll get to wherever it is. Like, you guys have a point and you guys have like a destination, and we're on a journey over here. So it's just very interesting. So thank you guys for talking.
It's very absolutely, it's a great observation. I mean, part of it is kind of the evolutionary base of hunting versus gathering. See, when you're gathering, you are with your friends, you are with your family, and the trees are not going anywhere. You don't need too much planning. It's mostly about spending time together, because the physical context itself is providing you the structure, all the structure that you need. Just being with your friends, with your family, is all the structure that you need in that context. When you're going hunting, it is a different story. There are these deer keep running all over the place. You have to chase them, you have to coordinate different things, you have to talk about it, you have to plan. So it's very different. So there is significant difference. And that's why these Jungian functions are very useful, because it takes this issue and looks at it in a general level. Because what you'll find is that some men operate one way and some men operate, so there is kind of percentage wise difference. And in the context. So another way of looking at it is that you can look at it as like a family context versus business context. So like the way you operate in business context, it has to be different, because firstly, you do not know the people. You have some specific goals that you're trying to do. You're not trying to spend time with them. That's not your primary value. You're trying to get something done in business. So it's kind of another way of looking at it is it's the difference between a business conversation, business context, and a family context. But absolutely. And I'm just delighted of how you're reacting to this. Excellent. Thank you. All right. So let's go to the next one, and we will have time to, go back to anything that you want to bring up. So once we are done with these 4 questions, I'm going to ask you, whatever you want to bring up. So you can bring up any questions that you want to discuss. Okay. Now, the question is, at its best, what do one-on-one conversations do for you? Now think of not just, now this time, leave us, you're talking about just the best of the best. What do one-on-one conversations do for you? So go ahead and type ! If you'd like to share. Evanik.
One-on-one conversations that I think leave you with is they leave you feeling understood by the other person. It's like the other person gets you. So when I'm talking to someone and they really understand me and they really get to know me, I feel like a sense of comfort and ease when I'm around that person. And it leaves me wanting more, like wanting to get to know them more, wanting to know more about them, building the friendship, and it's just more fun, as you're interacting with this person. So I think the best one-on-one conversations leaving you understood, leave you with being understood. So, and gotten and seen and heard. So I think that's the best thing.
Yeah, there is this being seen and being heard is a very big value, because fundamentally we do not have a full perspective on ourselves. We are living in our own heads. The other person, actually, you can see that they see the same thing that you see. And so it's like the other person saying yes to something deep in you. So it's like you're saying yes to something and they are saying yes to that. So it is, it's like a mirror. You're seeing yourself, but you're seeing yourself from a different perspective, an external perspective, and that is profoundly grounding for you. Excellent. Next up is Joe, followed by Katie. Joe.
So for this one, I'll be a little bit brief, but I think that at its best, in a one-on-one conversation, there's a breakthrough in the relationship itself. So that something is that you walk away and you remember that conversation that you had with someone. And the reason you remember it is because there was a breakthrough. So that, you said something that was meaningful to the person, or they said something meaningful to you, that you walk away saying to yourself, wow, now I understand that person a little bit better. And the relationship is stronger than it otherwise was prior to your having that conversation. That to me is really where at its best, there's a deeper connection that you're making that you wouldn't have otherwise made. That's what first comes to mind.
Wonderful. Excellent point. I just want to point out, for the benefit of Evanik and Joe, that this is the same pattern in the first answer. Evanik is focused on being, and Joe is focused on becoming. This is like the female versus and male comparison. Like, it's like she's saying, what? Why do you have to have a breakthrough? You are there, and you have established this. Yes, 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 but we have to go. So it's just wanted to point that out. Thank you both. Next up is going to be Katie.
Yeah, I think I would say with the one-on-one, you can go. I think what Joe was saying that too goes a little bit deeper. Like you could maybe share more information depending on how much trust you have with the people. I think that's why when you're saying if the new person, if you don't know, that's why I just kind of follow keep it positive and low key. And it's like, well, how horribly can that go wrong? And I assume that if I'm in a group setting, anything I share can go anywhere. And in a smaller, I might feel more, I might be able to tailor it more to the relationship that I have with the person.
Wonderful. Thank you, Katie. I want to follow up with the point that Joe made about breakthroughs. I certainly think in that way because I think of myself as a variable. I'm continuously trying to learn, trying to grow. And most of the friends that I have, most of the people I care about are trying to do the same thing. So what I'm focused on is that I'm saying, yes, there is a tremendous level of commonality that we have, tremendous level of trust. And so it's yes, and it's not yes, but yes, and both of us are trying to go somewhere. And because we know each other so well, what is the next breakthrough? What could be the next breakthrough? Many times it doesn't work out because everything has to come together in some ways, but you're continuously saying, okay, how can I make this better? So I definitely think in those terms. Next up is going to be Bob. Bob, go ahead.
Oh, okay, I wasn't expecting it that quick. The question is, what does it do for a conversation do for me?
No. So the question is, at its very best, what does a great one-on-one conversation do for you?
I would still take it as, phrase it as, what is it going to do for me? One thing is, am I going to learn? Am I going to learn from? What am I going to learn from the other person? I want to learn something new about them. And the second thing is, if I have something that I think is the case, can I get it across to the other person so that they can learn from me? So that's a two-way proposition. Now the conversation may, depending on whether it's just a hello or not, if it's going to be short. What I want to do is to know if we are going to be friendly toward each other. Is there going to be an ounce of rapport, or will the conversation go askew so that I have to be much more careful next time and listen much more carefully because it didn't go friendly the first time?
Wonderful. So on the positive side, what you're saying is that at its best, the conversation will teach you something and you will teach something to the other person. Wonderful. All right. So we're doing very well on time. So let's go to the fourth question. And then I'm going to ask you for any questions that you would like to put on the table for one-on-one conversation. So now this question is, what are the principles? What are the principles, tools, tips you found useful in making your one-on-one conversations better? So go ahead and type an exclamation mark of what you found useful. We'll start with Evanik.
I think one of the things I did find useful is, in all seriousness, is, maybe structuring the conversation a little bit, like taking something from that masculine energy and maybe structuring a conversation, because and maybe it's adaptable, right? So it's really being flexible with it. Like if you see that maybe a one-on-one conversation that you're having is not going the way that you think it should go, maybe looking at the structure of maybe taking just a quick second and looking at the structure of the conversation and trying to see what you're trying to get out of it. Like if I'm trying to know the other person, then maybe it's just going straight at it and saying, I want to learn a little more about you. Can you tell me, anything that you want me to know about you, or something, or maybe finding, like you said, some common ground. I think too, I'm just looking at the question. I think the principle would be like, what are you going into the conversation for? Are you trying to get something from that person, or are you just trying to like get to know the person better? And I think that takes it where the conversation is going. And I think if you like in a business setting, yes, everybody knows what you're trying to do. Like you're trying to sell your company, or you're trying to sell your business, or you're trying to sell the product in your company. Like, where that person's coming from. So it's 100% honest conversation. Well, I shouldn't say 100% honest, but it is an honest conversation, in that the person knows what you're there for and you know what you're there for. I think when it's personal, that's where it gets a little touchy, because like, are you trying to get to know the person, or are you trying to get something from that person? And then it might seem, that's where it might go a little inauthentic, but keeping in mind that if you're trying to just get to know the person, why are you trying to get to know the person? I mean, there has to be something that interests you about that person that makes you want to get to know the person a little bit better. Maybe, talking to the person is trying to figure out what that is. And then maybe saying to that person, hey, maybe you heard something they said at a party or something like that. So not going to go too far into the weeds, but I think kind of focusing on, the key is to focus on the other person. And when you stop losing focus, maybe ask yourself why you're losing focus. Like, why am I losing focus on this other person? And this is more personal relationships, I think, like friendships or building a friendship.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. Let me go ahead and process it. I just want to say a couple of things in terms of the structure. I mean, some things you can do very simply. Like, for example, I always try to say, okay, on one hand, so like both for kind of me giving some value to them and them giving some value to me. I don't even think of it that way. On one hand, like I'm always trying to say, okay, what would really help them? I'm asking that question because it's not like, so it's like, what would really help them? It doesn't matter what would really help them. I'm just focused on them, their life, and I'm asking that. And that gives some ideas. The second thing, which is actually very unusual, which I started doing a while ago, is to say, what is it that they are actually very good at and love doing? So I want them, and which I also like, but letting people express what they really care about and kind of engage that, I think it's a very good thing, because you actually end up learning a lot and they love it. So it's kind of like win-win. So I'm always looking for win-win things. And some of it is like, I'm using some things that I have, and in some things that they are actually exercising something that they have, something like that. I don't know, maybe it's still a very structured way of thinking, but those are the two things. But I like your point about the focus of being aware when things are not going well, or things are not going quite as well as you would like. Being just aware of that, okay, how well things are going, and making adjustments, because many times, I think women are typically much, much better at this than men, but men can be very dense about things, from not noticing things. So I think that the issue of focus is very important. Next up is Joe.
Yeah, I think you're hitting on a very important key fundamental point, is to be aware where the other person is and to be aware where you are as well in that process, because that's going to be how you're processing information. That's going to impact how you react to the situation. But it's also understanding where the other person is fundamental, in the sense that they won't feel like they're being heard if you can't meet them where they are. If you don't some degree understand the point of view that how they're trying to express themselves. If, for an example, somebody is expressing something very serious and you brush it off or make light of it, that makes it a distance in the conversation. So there's got to be an awareness as a principle, I think, of where the other person is. And that really very much speaks to the importance of connection as well. Another aspect of it, I think, as far as a principle goes, is to be as authentic as possible. I think that's where people can sense that more times than not. Sometimes it's natural to want to impress somebody, right? It's natural to maybe not to be a little nervous or something like that, or things like that. But I think if you're as authentic as possible and you're just relaxed, I think that establishes a level of trust in the relationship, that somebody will open up, which gets back to one of the things that at its best leads to a breakthrough. Mm-hmm. Sometimes as a principle, and it's being authentic, but it could be also, there's a certain level of humility that could also be in that, as a subcategory to that, and that you're revealing something about yourself. But that goes back to being aware and knowing whether it's appropriate to reveal something about yourself as well. So that those are difficult things sometimes. So those are just a couple of principles. Those are two principles that I think, is that awareness of the other person and where you are, and authenticity is another aspect of it. I think as a governing principle. I think these others are the purpose of the conversation is obviously something that as well that you would use as a principle. Anyway, those are three things.
Wonderful, thank you. So folks, now what I want to do is I want to now open it up for any questions, any kind of points that you found interesting. Let's just list all the points that you find interesting, you have a question about, would like to discuss further. Let's put all the points down, okay? And let's see where it is. What would you like to discuss? What questions do you have? What do you find interesting? Just go ahead and type exclamation mark. I'll collect all of those things and let's see where we are and how to handle the conversation from now on. Next up is Joe.
Are you going to be upset if I say vector analysis?
No, you don't say that.
No, it's just.
Mike is going to be upset. It's not vector, it's tensor. What are you talking
That's right. Yeah, yes, that's right. That's right. Some of the really, I think, I think how to set boundaries. I'd be, interested in hearing more.
Okay.
If anybody else had anything about that.
Sure.
I think that how an informational gathering, a conversation would it be, how that would, how people feel like that should be structured. I would be interested in hearing anything about that. Persuasion, I don't care as much about, but those are the two that I would actually.
Sure. Okay, I'm going to add the matrix. How do you, how can you use metrics for this? I'm also going to put the point about the balance between speaking and listening. How do you do that? Okay, folks, go ahead and type exclamation mark.
Mike's matrix actually could be really
On-
interesting. I mean, but anyway, I'll just leave it at that.
Yes. Next up is Evanik.
My question is, what level of vulnerability do you have in a conversation with someone? Like sometimes, that person that always kind of overshares, like what level of vulnerability do you go to? Or maybe it's just me, I don't know.
Wonderful, excellent point. All right, anybody else wants to put any questions on the table? Anything else they want to discuss? Go ahead and type exclamation mark. Okay, so let's, Bob, go ahead. What questions?
I'm not sure these are, well, I guess it is a question. I think that the topic of boundaries is a very important one. When you have what kind of boundaries exist in conversations where one is going too far? Shall I name something or?
No, we're not answering anything. We're
we're not answering. Okay.
We're just questions.
Yeah. What kind of what limits the nature of the conversations? Boundaries. Yes. Thank
you, David.
I think differences in one-on-one conversations based on the medium. In other words, like the Zoom video call, phone call, in person, seeing people in a large group, a cafe, in private, at home.
Wonderful, excellent. Okay. So let's start with the boundaries point. Then I want to talk about vulnerability. Then I want to talk about the balance of speaking and listening. And then finally, we'll go to the matrix. Okay, and then we will bring in the medium at some point. So let's start with the boundaries. What are the boundaries of a conversation? What are the ways, different ways? What do you mean by boundaries? How do you define them? What happens if you cross, So just thinking about boundaries of a conversation, the limits of the conversation. And you can think of it in terms of just the physical limits. You have this much time. You are in a certain place. You can look at it in terms of commonality of values, that this is the things that we have in common. So just any thoughts about boundaries and conversation? You're welcome to say anything about this. Katie.
I think that's where people were, the last conversation kind of, this fits in well with the last conversation of how do you know you're talking too much or too little. Mm-hmm. I think like with a very assertive person, it will be pretty clear cut, but it'll be a little bit harder with people that are maybe less forceful in how they're asserting themselves. I think like currently I often, especially if it's a new person, just exactly what you were saying, like you don't know the context. I usually just don't encourage. My style is not to be assertive. My style is to not encourage the conversation rather than to put a stop to it, to let it kind of peter out on its own.
Thank you. So any thoughts about boundaries? We'll go with Joe and Bob. Joe.
Yeah, so I think I like the point that you made about physical limitations, in the sense that yes, you have a certain amount of time, you know, all of a sudden that's a hard boundary that you got to work around, and so I think that's an important one. I think the boundaries can be established based on the purpose as well, so that if your purpose of the conversation is more transactional, then that puts a certain boundary around the conversation itself. I also think that if it's more of a one-on-one where you're trying to connect with someone, I think that extends the boundary, and it makes it a little bit more difficult how much to share, because sometimes you're it depends. Sometimes I think it's important to understand why you're sharing in the first place. Are you sharing for yourself, or are you sharing for the other person? You know, sometimes that helps you draw a boundary. That makes the boundary a little more difficult. Sometimes you share something personal about yourself in order to establish trust with another person, so that if you're trying to get them to open up, you're the first one making that kind of you're extending the boundary of the conversation so that they'll come back into your sphere. So I think that that's one important part as well, is when I'm drawing a boundary, is kind of like, well, how far will I go in order to get this person to open up? And that's not, you know, that's a judgment call. I almost feel like this is kind of CJ's discussion on Wednesday, where it's like measurement, where we're having a discussion based on measurement. What's the desired outcome of the conversation? So, you know, so anyway, bring in the design way. Yeah, you could kind of design the conversation.
Yeah, no, excellent points. I want to incorporate David's point about mediums, because I think it belongs right here, because it's a question of boundaries. You know, certain mediums make certain things possible. Obviously, face-to-face, one-on-one conversation, you have the maximum bandwidth. You can't do the same thing with a phone. You can't do the same thing with an email. You can't do something with a text. And each of them sets the limits of what can be done. And then you kind of have to look at the entire context and see what is that text, or what is that phone conversation riding on, and what will you do across these different mediums. So I think of the medium as just another boundary, another limit on the conversation. Next up is Bob, followed by Evanique. Bob.
Okay, I can think of a few kinds of boundaries. One of the things we're doing tonight is having a lot of conversations, and these conversations are structured, if I may. It depends on if there is a leader who is leading the the nature of the conversations. It's important to follow that leader if you believe in the leader, because there are a lot of people listening. So, the leader will create a certain format for the structure, for the conversations. Another thought I have is, was talking about personal, how do you get the other person to, if you talk to a person and you ask them 2 personal questions, it may rub them the wrong way. They may not want to talk about that. And they may never, I've had this experience where they never forget that I asked them a certain question, and they don't want to talk to me anymore. So don't get too personal. What else do I have to say? Oh, the nature, the structure is important. Like we're doing face-to-face here. Pardon my lack of visual, but I belong to a forum where one sends messages back and forth, and I like this forum because I can think I can take as long as I want to respond to the other person who is talking, and that is different here where there is a time limit. And I'll stop there.
Thank you, Bob. Folks, just for reference, we are focusing on one-on-one conversations, so boundaries apply to all conversations, and you know, in a conversation like this, which is many-to-many conversation, the structure is going to be very different to make possible many-to-many conversations. In case of one-on-one conversations, it is different. So let's focus mostly on the one-on-one conversation, because that's what the today's topic is. And go ahead.
Good point.
Yeah, it just makes it simple. You know, it's like one-on-one conversations. I mean, there are all kinds of conversations, right? I mean, there is conversations in small groups, which have a very different nature. Conversations with a large interactive group like this. There is communication, which is like a lecture, you're giving a lecture or listening to the lecture, like one to many kind of a conversation. Each of them have very different requirements. So today, let's focus on the one-on-one conversation. Next up is going to be Evanik, followed by Katie. Evanik.
I think one thing about boundaries is it's hard to establish them. So what I always do is if I'm in a one-on-one conversation with a person, I tell them, hey, I'm about to ask you a personal question. First of all, I ask, can I ask the personal question? And then if they say yes, and I always say, you don't have to answer this because they don't know what the question is. So I'm always like, you don't have to answer this, and then I ask the question. And then if it's up to them and then it helps to establish that boundary without offending the person, I think. So I think the key is just to ask, because people have different boundaries. And some people are comfortable with asking, you can ask them anything and they're fine. And then other people, they're like, this is a point where I don't go across. I'm not ready to discuss it yet, or for whatever reason. And I think the key is not only setting the boundaries, but the other person accepting those boundaries and not trying to push somebody past their boundaries, because you don't know what is going on with that person. They may not be ready to go past that boundary. But if you establish that trust and you respect their boundaries, I can guarantee you that they will go past those boundaries eventually. And they will trust you because they know that you respect who they are and their boundaries. So I think that's my point.
Excellent point. And I really like the point about actually asking so that people have a heads up about, look, this is what I'm planning to do. Does this make sense to you? So give them a chance to object or to say, give you feedback on that structure itself. Next up is Katie.
Yeah, I agree with what people are saying. I think if somebody gives you a heads up, you can say, that's personal, or you also kind of, I think that's why I'm kind of sticking with, the positive and low key. The worst, you're probably, the worst things maybe they're not as interested as you, but at least you're not going to offend. I think with Bob, I'm always impressed by people that when they're recognizing too that someone has pulled away, because that's a huge thing too. Like I remember, like when a friend of mine, he got divorced, and he said he was telling me about his divorce, and he was saying, well, at some point she stopped sharing her feelings with me. And I was really impressed that he noticed that she had done that, because some people don't even notice that you've stopped, that you've pulled away. So I kind of see it positively when people notice that they've crossed the boundary, and then, yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's good. And the trick is to be able to do that as quickly as possible as it is happening. Sometimes you notice afterwards saying, oh, you know what, that's what happened. But I think it's even more important to be to be alive, to be aware of what is going on as it is happening. And then even more important is that when it is something which is negative, figuring out a proper way of addressing it in a respectful way. Giving them a kind of an open-ended thing is like, look, I'm noticing this, or whatever, giving a chance for them to communicate anything negative to you. I think that's very important. Excellent point. Thank you. All right. Next up is going to be a very tricky point about vulnerability. That's actually a very deep point, because when you talk about, I don't know exactly the sense in which Evanik meant the question, but there is many different ways you can say, okay, to what extent is a person, kind of vulnerable? I just want to, so go ahead and interpret the question as you want. What is the role of vulnerability in a conversation. You can look at it as a virtue, look at it as a indicator, whatever you want to do. I just want to see what you think of the issue of vulnerability. Go ahead and type exclamation mark. Joe, go ahead.
Okay. Let me give this a shot. When I think about vulnerability, meaning can I ask for clarification?
Sure. How about this? We'll have Evanik pose the question.
Okay.
Evanik, what did you mean to ask?
So I know, like, on one-on-one conversations, vulnerability is part of it. But I guess the question I have, and maybe because it's something I struggle with, is how much to share with a person. How vulnerable do you be with a person? And at what point is it too much vulnerability? Or is there such a thing as too much vulnerability? So kind of.
Okay,
like
let's just put that as a question.
Yeah.
That is the question. Okay, not what I said is the question, but what Evanik just said. That is the question. So anybody wants to answer it, go ahead and type exclamation mark. Bob. I just want to make one comment, okay? Folks, understand that all of us are different, okay? All of us have our own problems, things that we are very good at, things which are not very good at, okay? Just like, you can't pretend to be good at things that you're not good at. It's not a good idea to pretend to be bad at things that you're good at, okay? So people are going to be at various levels. So each question they're going to answer from where they are, okay? Don't lose the sense of where you are because the strategy has to be for you. So I just wanted to make that clear, because we're going to have all kinds of answers and different people's answers are going to be different. And we're not necessarily saying, okay, I don't agree with this, I don't agree like that, but take in what people are saying and make up your own mind about what you think, how you can engage in conversations. Sorry about the interruption. Bob, please go ahead.
You said it, Shrikant, right on. It's very, everyone is vulnerable in some way. And it is very important, and I believe in a conversation, to watch out how they are responding to you. Are they responding directly to exactly the way you phrase the issue, or are they being evasive? Now, if they're evasive, there's a reason behind that, and pay attention to that. Because they're evasive there's a reason for them. That indicates some kind of vulnerability. So that is where listening. After all, you're talking to somebody who is not you. So it's all in the list. Listening will tell you how they are vulnerable.
Thank you. Next up is going to be Joe.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of comes back to the idea of boundaries to a certain degree. But I do think listening is key, but I would extend listening in this particular instance to be body language, very much so.
I just want to point out, Joe, that Evanik's question is different. It is not about vulnerability of the other person. It is your vulnerability. When do you choose not to share? And when do you choose to share?
When do you choose it? And so I think that okay, so that would eliminate listening in that particular instance. But even then, listening gives you the ability to know when to react, right? So, and there's also, I think that looking at body language will tell you a lot about how somebody is reacting to you, is how much you should probably share in this particular instance. So if somebody's like, what the hell are you telling me? Like, then you're going to be like, well, then you've crossed that line, and you need to be able to read that. But on a more practical level, I think that, and I am sure I don't hide my reactions all that well. So so it's kind of like, okay.
Well, it's very interesting. It's like everybody is so different. It's like some people require the reaction. What the hell are you telling me?
Yeah, it's like,
whereas other people will say, oh, there was this minute pause of a quarter of a second.
Yes.
So something is not right. They are not happy with. So, and people's ability to react is all of that. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, and actually, depending on how well you know the person, you kind of can anticipate how they're reacting, how they're going to react to a certain degree. And when that reaction is different than what you anticipated, you may have crossed some type of line. I don't know what line it may have been. But also deciding, I think it's a risk analysis on your part. What's the risk reward if I share this? If I share something personal about myself, why am I sharing it? And then what is this person going to give me? What am I asking of this person as well, as a way of actually of determining whether this is a good idea or not. So I think that's kind of, there's a risk analysis kind of, I don't know how Michael can speak to how quantitative we can get on it, but I think there's some intuition that goes into this that, it's just calculating literally what's the risk and reward. Why are you telling? It's important to ask yourself, why are you saying it in the first place?
Wonderful. Thank you. Next up is David.
And I think it has a lot to do with developing trust with the other person. It's like, and how that's established. So it's not just the history, but it's, and Shrikant, as you were saying, we all have background. Every, whatever sorts of relationships, other experiences we've had, but I don't know. It's just how cautious to be in terms of one's. I guess what I'm trying to say is it's a combination of one's collective experience with all other relationships and the trust and history with the specific person one's working with. So that some people have, as we're saying, how to put it. There are different personality types or different types of trauma experiences, and they may not read people well. And it's part of that evolution through life and learning that, okay, this was, that's one is, to get a psychologist, like replaying some sort of a, bad experience with other friends, with parents, whatever, and being too vulnerable, not vulnerable enough. These, avoided, unavoided type of relationships. So I think it's a combination of all of that history, which I guess is sort of asking everything said, but possibly what not to do, combined with the history and trust one has with the person, or thinks one has with the person in the conversation at the moment.
Excellent point. This is really crucial. So we kind of bring our entire history of human relations when we are talking to an individual person. And I just want to add that the other person is doing the same thing. So when you are trying to interact with the other person, I think it's important to keep in mind, okay, they have this context of entire history of dealing with other people in a certain way. Things have worked out well for them, not worked out well for them. And that's what they're bringing to bear. So when they are reacting to me in a certain way, many times it's not you, it is basically where they're coming from. So to be cognizant of that, I think it's very important as well. Now let's, last I want to go to Evanique. And then we will go to the next question about the balance between speaking and listening. Evanique, did you hear anything that was interesting?
It was all interesting. I think Dave's point was really good about that other person is also deciding what they should share or not. And I think what I heard is like, the reaction, and I get like Joe's reaction, like, in person, but it's kind of hard to gauge if you're on the phone with a person. Like, should I be sharing this? I guess for me, it's always been a thing of like, I came up in a culture where you didn't put your business out. So you kind of kept it close to the hip. But then I also have a lot of people that are willing to share with me. And I hate to admit it, but like, sometimes I'm like, why? Like, why are you sharing this? So it kind of helped me to see that I'm not being mean, but it's just like, well, why are you sharing this? And so to me, I'll go up on guard. So I've been working on like letting my guard down with like my really good friends and, sharing, but I'm also like, I don't want to burden anybody either. So I kind of like have that, I don't want to burden you, but I know I should share more of myself. So it was all very helpful. So I thank everybody for answering the questions.
Wonderful. Thank you. The next question is about how do you balance between speaking and listening in a one-on-one conversation? What principles do you use? How do you do it? When do you know that you're speaking too much? When do you know when you're listening too much or you're not speaking enough? And how do you handle it? Go ahead and type an exclamation mark if you want to speak about this. You are welcome to listen as much as you want, but please speak about speaking and listening. And that's the only way people can hear it. Next up is Evanique.
I think, see, here's the thing. Like, I think it kind of has to flow with the conversation, which I know is not very structured at all. How much to speak and how much to listen. I think you have to gauge that. And I think each person's different and each friendship is different. So it's kind of like reading the room, right? Like knowing when the person may have spaced out on you. Maybe I'm talking too much, or, when should I like noticing when a person disengages in a conversation and maybe asking them a question that re-engages them and having them listen, or having them speak and then you listen. I think another thing is just like addressing the elephant in the room. It's like, if you feel like you've been talking too much, just say, you know what, I think I'm talking a little too much right now. Do you want to say anything? Like, you realize that you've been going on and on and on. So I think it's kind of like not so much a metric like, oh, if you've been talking 5 minutes, that's too long. It's more so like, if you notice that you're the only one talking, maybe that person's disengaged and maybe you need to re-engage them in the conversation.
Thank you, Evanique. Next up is Joe.
I think the balance is context dependent. Some people like to talk, and if they like to talk, then you just have to be prepared to listen. But I also think that there is the balance of, if somebody's telling you something and you're trying to get to the underlying matter, what they're trying to say, then you're required to speak a little bit more. In other words, if they're like myself, sometimes I'm not clear, and so somebody, you pull something out. So if you dig deep enough, you'll find, what the person is saying. And I think that dictates how much you actually have to engage. That's a good indicator. Right there. I think that if it's not coming out, or if it's not apparent to you as to what is being communicated, then I think you're required to speak a little bit more, because you're actually re-articulating what they're saying and trying to ask the question then as to what are they fundamentally trying to get to. So in that case, you're going to end up speaking a lot more than you would if the person is, very clear as to what they're thinking about a particular situation. So I think that but that's just an example of the dynamics of a conversation that will dictate a balance of how much listening and how much speaking you actually need to do. So, because you want to get to the heart of the matter, but you don't want to keep repeating yourself either. I think that that's a really good example. If you're repeating yourself too, then probably you're speaking a little too much, because or the other person's not listening, in which case you should probably need to speak less too, as if they're not listening. So I think those are indications.
Thank you. Next up is David, followed by Katie. David.
Well, I agree with Joe. So I think it's good, at least public relations, to have some repetition with that, to emphasize a point. I mean, you sort of need to say something 3 times for people to remember it. So, I mean, there's a balance here. I mean, in terms of what, I mean, there's obviously in this situation, if the person's yawning, maybe you're talking too much. But I think this is not to take this too far off track, but I mean, an important aspect regarding body language, which is something that some people just naturally have. I mean, understand, interpret, and some people need more instruction or to learn. But I mean, there's certain things of terms of, is the person, facing you? I mean, is the person that's communicating that the person is actually paying attention, as opposed to if they're having a conversation and their legs are pointed in sideways, or they aren't, or they're turning to look at you, but their body isn't at you. I mean, that's an important signal of whether they're actually paying attention, how important the conversation is. Another thing is just mirroring, which is a very natural human, for most people, or if you cough, they cough. If you fold your arms, if you scratch yourself. I mean, there's this natural human tendency which will tell you if you're connecting with them. I mean, and if they aren't sort of mirroring, you cross your legs, you cross your arms, they aren't doing these things, that can be a signal that they are bored or not interested, not paying attention to this. So I mean, just the whole body language and mirroring, which is not exactly matter of the board, but I think is important for signaling how engaged the person is with the conversation.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, David. This is all really, really fascinating. I keep thinking, okay, let me have Katie go first. Katie, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to comment a little bit more on what Evanique said. Definitely the cue of if you're the only one talking is definitely it's always like a question mark. Because for me, for example, if I'm either like not encouraging and hoping to stop, or I'm liking it, but I don't want to be engaged in the situation. Like I'm like, I don't want to be brought into that. Maybe, it's a bad, I don't know, whatever it is. Maybe it's always contextual. So I think that's why when someone was I think they posted on the wall, how do you, the same cue can have different meanings. So both of those situations, one I'm enjoying, but I don't want to be brought in, and the other one I'm actively not enjoying, and it's the same cue. So that's why it's really hard to come up with very rule-based cues. It's just, it could be this or it could be that.
Wonderful. See, I have a very odd way of thinking about this. I don't know whether, I always think that firstly, you have to be listening all the time. Even when you're speaking, you have to be listening. Listening is fundamental, because you're not going to know how much to speak unless you're continuously listening. So listening, I think, is fundamental, is the primary. And then based on that, you're choosing how much to speak. One of the things, it's not just speaking. I think it is either you're transmitting something to them, or you're trying to get, you're letting them transmit something to you. So you can be speaking, for example, if you say, look, I hear you say this. Did I get this? Okay, like when you're doing that, that's actually you listening. Though it is speaking, you're actually listening. Another way of speaking, where you're encouraging listening, is asking a question. Yes, when you're asking a question, you're speaking. But the whole purpose of it is to start listening more. So I see it in that way. Next up is Mike. Mike, what is the proper balance between speaking and listening?
More than balance, it's the texture of that speaking and listening. When you go to your IRS audit, you're likely to not necessarily be totally honest. When you go to the doctor, you may not necessarily be totally honest. What's in common between the two of them that maybe now makes you more honest than you would tend to be? If you've gone to, I don't know, you all look pretty healthy. You probably haven't gone to the doctor recently, but the doctor hardly looks at you. He sits in front of a chatbot and is talking. If it's a MedStar, if it's a doctor that's in the MedStar system, or if you go to one of the IRS service centers for your in-person audit, they're sitting in front of a computer and they ask us a series of questions. And the principle is ask the right questions and you're going to get the right answers. The doctor starts out and asks you a bunch of questions and you give him answers and he leads you, it leads him down through AI techniques right now to a path and a diagnosis.
Mike, but the examples that you're giving are very unusual examples.
Yeah, that's why they're all context. They're all like what Joe said, Ebony said, it's all depends on the context. Every example is unusual. Tolstoy said that about family problems.
Sure.
Everything is a special case. Everybody's a little different. Now, the first conversation context, you had an attendee that I messaged him or her. They didn't answer me. The attendee was named Lambda 8.3. And they wouldn't answer my question. I don't know if you can go back and find out who that was, but Lambda 8.3 is Google's new chat box.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, there is a person with the same name, so I'm not sure about that. But
okay, well, anyway, ask the right questions. Ask the right questions, you get the right answers.
Okay, very good.
Now, if you go to a GM auto dealer, which
let's do one thing. Mike, you're taking very specialized examples. So let us do one thing. Let us go to the last question, which is the question that you had raised. Okay, so let's try to do this. Let's try to do this as a conversation. Okay, so let's try to balance speaking and listening here to try to see if we can make what you're saying accessible to this audience. Okay, so first question. So I'm going to interview you. Okay, so first question, what are you talked about a matrix for measuring how you're doing on a conversation. You mentioned some of the things, like you may be trying to get information. You may be in the process of planning. You may be trying to attune yourself. Do you have what are the other axes along which you can measure a conversation?
You listed some of them. I listed a few others to add to it. Now,
Would you like to add any more to these three?
I have to think about that a lot, and I'm independent of this meeting. I think about that a lot during the day and in the middle of the night, and when I'm watching the at the triple witching expiration date on the options and futures. I even think about it more. What are the questions I ask? What are the answers I should have asked?
Okay, so let me go ahead and try to ask it another way.
Okay.
So there are some criteria. We have three of them. There are probably maybe another 4 or 5. Okay, and we can all come up with our own criteria of how to measure conversations. So let's say that you have those. Okay.
Yes.
Now you're actually engaging in a conversation like this one. Okay. Now we're talking back and forth here. How do you actually use these? In the middle of a conversation, what do you do?
Well, in these conversations, some are, I don't quite know what the goal is. I'm trying to learn a little bit about this. I'm not trying to fix my air conditioner or
sure. So
avoid an IRS audit right now.
Right. So we are not doing IRS audit. I'm not your doctor. Okay, what we are trying to do is that in this conversation, let us specify the purpose. I'm trying to understand how you use mathematical models in order to have a better conversation. That's what I'm trying to do. And I presume that you're trying to explain to me how you do it. Is that a reasonable assumption?
Yeah.
Okay. So let us do that. So that is the purpose. That is the context of the conversation. So my question is that you have a set of axes along which you can measure a conversation. How do you actually do this when you are in the middle of a conversation like this? So for example, can you apply it to this conversation? Like what kind of information are we doing information? Are we doing planning? Are we tuning ourselves? How would you measure it at this point? Our conversation right now.
We're trying to brainstorm how to design the next chatbot to be able to use for 52 living ideas. I could tell you how I would try to come up with a appropriate futures montage with hedging and how that conversation is evolving. You want to? I'll give you a couple sentences of background on that.
No, don't do that.
No, no, I just want to understand, because I think this way of thinking is extremely good way of thinking, of trying to see a problem. I'm saying, okay, these are the different axes. So let me tell you how I do something like this. Okay, so I have a criteria. Like I don't have like a general criteria for conversations as such, but if a conversation is particularly important to me, let's say a business conversation, I will say, okay, what am I trying to do? I'm trying to establish a common context. I'm trying to understand where they are coming from in their business. I'm trying to see what are the pain points that they have. So I have like some criteria, and I have actually them written down. I have say 1, 2, 3, 4. I will have bullet points. It has to be very short and very crisp, designed for that. I don't know how to do it in a general way, but for that conversation, I've said I have these 4 points. Now, when I'm actually engaging in the conversation, I'm making notes, just 1 word or 2 word notes on each of those points. Like the most important thing I'm looking for is that if I don't hit some points, like, okay, it's very important for me to understand their business. If I have not gotten that to it yet, it will stand out for me. So I use it like that. What do you think of that?
That's precisely the way I use it. That's precisely what you should do.
Okay, wonderful, wonderful. So, Mike, this has been amazing. This has been a good conversation. I really appreciate it, sir.
You made a breakthrough.
Everything we've done is amazing. To me, I'm everything is magic. I'm awed by almost everything I see, especially here.
No, it's just amazing what we are doing. So thank you folks so much. I just want to tell you that I'm very excited about this new series that we are doing on. I'm currently calling it Carl Jung, but I really want to go into psychology in general and try to kind of hit certain points. I want to look at Carl Jung. I might want to look at Julian Jaynes. I'm really scared to do that far more than Carl Jung. So I doubt I will do it. I'm working on it on my own. And then of course, William James, I want to hit William James. But what I'm planning to do is I will take specific topics. Psychology is a mess. Okay. It's like, and there is so many disagreements I have with everybody. Even Jung, I have major disagreements. Okay. So for example, that 7 sermons on dead, Jung is very good. He's very integrated. What he thinks Christianity is, he thinks Christianity is dualistic, okay, which it is not. It is true that most people hold it as dualistic, but he takes that as a core part of Christianity and comes up with all kinds of wrong conclusions based on it, which you will find in in the first essay that we are looking on Thursday, the spiritual problem of modern man. He is wrong in a very fundamental way. At the same time, he's gotten many things right. So to be able to parse all of that in a context where we're going back and forth, and different people will have different understandings of psychology itself, of Jung himself. And so I don't know. I mean, it's going to be really, really challenging. So I really look forward to that. I mean, the thing about Jung that I really like is that he is just brilliant, and he has so many great things to say that even when he's, there are some limits that he has. I should not put it, I should not do aspersion. There are basically 2 limits that he has. One is that he looks at things just a lot. He's focused mostly on the internal. He doesn't fully grasp the external context shaping the internal as well as some other people. So this interaction between external and internal is what he doesn't focus as much on. He's focused largely on the internal. He gets it, but he gets it a little bit, not as much as he could. And the second is that he has discovered depth psychology. He has discovered the unconscious. So he's focused heavily on that. He understands the use of conscious. See, that's his greatness. He understands the crucial importance of conscious, but he doesn't understand it as well as other people like William James or Julian Jaynes. All right. So that is his limit. So, but in spite of that, what you can learn from him about the unconscious is truly spectacular. He knows that there is this deep interaction between conscious and unconscious. You may agree, you may disagree with exactly how it takes place, and you might have your own way about thinking about it. He also knows that there is an outside and inside that is interacting. Again, you may not agree with exactly how it is going on, but it gives us a great starting point to start talking at a level. The other part is that it is updated for modern times. So it is taking some of the ideas that we've been discussing, which are done in 500 BC, Lao Tzu, Bhagavad Gita, and Gospel of John, which is a little bit later than that. But that era, the axial age kind of thinking, he is dealing with it from sitting in like early 20th century, in the middle of world wars, with everything falling apart. So that's his context. And so you have to appreciate that. You have to appreciate deeply the greatness of some of an individual mind trying to grapple with such weighty problems. So I think there is a lot to learn from there, and it's going to be really fascinating to see those conversations. So I hope you guys will join. This is going to be on Thursdays. All right. Any closing thoughts? Go ahead and type an exclamation mark if you have any closing thoughts. Just less than a minute each. Joe.
Thank you for hosting. You know, I'm glad you're feeling well enough. I know it's been a long day. So no, this was there was a couple of things that I took away from this part of the series that that maybe I had not thought about. So in any case, yeah, just primarily reminding myself the purpose of each conversation and each statement that I'm making. I think that I've kind of lost touch with that a little bit. So anyway.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Joe. Thank you. Next up, and I really appreciate, like, you know, the thing is that the most important thing is to be kind of honest with yourself. And that's the opportunity that conversations give you, and most people don't take it. So I really appreciate you doing that. Next up is Mike. You got 30 seconds to wrap up.
Oh, 30 seconds. So what you're calling ask the right questions and get the right answers is the Socratic method, which was invented by, of all people, Socrates. And Jeff Nugent, who we invented here, he says, when somebody asks a question, when somebody asks them that question, you say why. And then when they give you the answer, you say why. You have to keep drilling down. And that's what GM, MedStar, and the IRS do when they keep talking on you. It's like a dentist drilling down until they get the right answer.
Thank you.
You want one more? You want one more thing?
Let's wrap it up, because I want to wrap it up nicely. I just want to say that actually the way in which Jeff works is firstly, it's not only in Zoom. I saw him in person. He exists in 3 dimensions in in the Washington Square Park. Secondly, his style is actually different. The asking why is one direction to go. His style is to ask, can you tell me something more about it? It is a way of, and both, it's like getting more out of the other person to provide the context, which is a different direction. Both are extremely valuable. Next up is closing remarks by Evanik.
I just want to say thank you, Shrikant, for a wonderful conversation. It was enlightening, to say the least. I did take away a lot about conversation and really making sure that I am focused and in tune with the other person that I'm talking to. And I think still the whole male-female dynamic is just, I like, it's eye-opening. You guys don't understand. Like, it just helps so much. So thank you.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you, Evanik. Maybe you can do like a parody video. They used to have, there used to be something called a Mystery Science Theater, where there were these 2 robots who would comment on the film. So you can play the video of this YouTube video of this one, and you say, oh, this is what Shrikant is saying, this is what Joe is saying, look at where it is coming from. It was from this one. So you can do a 1 more level commentary on that. Just kidding. Wonderful. Thank you.
I missed that show.
What's that?
Mystery Science 3000.
I missed that show. I miss it. Like, the 2 robots were commenting. Yes. Yeah.
Wonderful. All right, folks. It was delightful. I'm just so happy that we could do this. I was saying, okay, I feel up to it. And the first thing I wanted to do was to talk to you folks. So thank you so much for being here. Always grateful. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Shrikant. And I'm glad you're feeling better.